Okay, thank you so much again for joining us. I'd like to give a big, sincere thank you to our members. It's been an amazing year for biking, and we are incredibly, incredibly grateful for you. My name is Lindsay Goff. I'm the Digital Marketing Manager at PeopleForBikes, and today we are talking new administration and what that means for bikes. I'd like to welcome up our speakers, Noah of PeopleForBikes. She is our Federal Affairs Manager, as well as Charles Cooper, the Managing Director at Signal Group in DC. So take it away.
Thanks, Lindsay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us on today's webinar. We're excited to share some of the work we're doing and sharing updates of what's happening in DC. It is busy here, as I'm sure you're all aware, but we'll give you sort of the inside bike scoop and how all of these different moving pieces and the players themselves we plan to work with and to improve, the situation for bikes to the best that we can. So to start off our agenda for today, we're going to go through the 5 policy pillars that are really guiding our policy work at PeopleForBikes. This is something that we came up with our larger policy team, and I'll get into it more. We'll go through some recent nominees for the presidential cabinet and talk about how those positions relate to the bicycle industry and our policy priorities and what we're asking these different agencies and nominees to do. We'll go through the legislative opportunities ahead this year in this Congress and how we're taking advantage of them to insert bicycles and push bicycles as part of a broader policy solution for some of the greatest challenges that we're facing in the US today. And lastly, we'll go over a few specific pieces of legislation we're particularly excited about, including an electric bicycle tax credit. Thanks. Okay. So the policy pillars, we're excited to share these with the industry. After months of some internal strategic planning, figuring out how do we distill all of the work that PeopleForBikes does, not just at the federal level, but at the state and local level too. Where do those issues lie and how can we focus our work? And so we created these 5 pillars, which, as you can see on the slide, building safe mobility networks. So that's infrastructure, that's bike lanes, that's everything that gets you from point A to point B on a bike safely, and making sure that they're networks, they're not disparate pieces of bike infrastructure. Growing the bike industry, of course. So using policy to the best of our ability to create a positive business environment for bike businesses and to help businesses get products to consumers, especially in this moment of really heightened demand. We are obviously really focused on fostering DEI in the bike world, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Everything from making bicycling itself more accessible to different communities, low-income communities, places that have been historically marginalized from the sport, the activity, the transportation of bicycling, and then looking inside at the industry too, and how can we use policy to support better hiring practices, things like that, to create more diversity and foster that. Improving recreational access for bikes has been core to our work for a long time. So making sure that everyone has access to safe, healthy, fun recreation by bike, whether, whatever path that you're on, whatever surface I could say, and promoting sustainability, which is not just sustainability, it's a lot to do with how can we insert bicycles as part of a broader climate solution. We know there's so much that bikes can do to lower carbon emissions, to reduce congestion, and to help meet those bigger national goals. And so focusing on sustainability internally to our practices and externally in the policy world is important. Given those 5 pillars and how we're focusing our work this year and the next several years, they relate quite strongly, I think, to the nominees and now Secretary Buttigieg that we'll talk about today, and how their roles and agencies can be defined from a bike perspective. I'm sure you're all aware that former South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg is now the confirmed Secretary of the Department of Transportation. So Secretary Buttigieg, and we are sort of focusing in these three main areas in our work with the Department of Transportation. How can we leverage existing processes, programs, grants, et cetera, to really advance the construction and the building of active transportation networks and through funding? Safety is so crucial, and it's something that Secretary Buttigieg himself has said many times now in the media, in his confirmation hearings, emphasized the importance of safety, of complete streets, of reducing bicycle and pedestrian fatalities and injuries. He's been really out front talking about that, and so we're, excited to hear that, and we'll be making sure that those goals and those promises are kept through policy. And of course, back to climate change, the Department of Transportation has a lot of power or agency, you could say, to shift some of the work to lower carbon emissions. We know that the transportation sector in the US accounts for nearly a third of all of US carbon emissions. And so there's a clear path for bikes in that space and in those goals to lower carbon emissions by enhancing access to bicycles, bicycle infrastructure, of course, and so we'll be holding DOT to that for sure in the next few years. Go to the next slide. There we go.
On the Department of the Interior side, Congresswoman Deb Haaland from New Mexico has been nominated and had her confirmation hearing the last 2 days. There's obviously a lot that we're focused on at the Department of the Interior, including making sure that we continue to have a recreation-based economy around public lands, making sure that there's access for everybody, including local access to underserved communities where some of the traditional barriers of transportation costs and other things are removed, and promoting conservation and recreation policy as a part of natural climate solutions. It goes without saying that bikes provide a lot of opportunity for recreation on public lands, and we want to work really closely with the Department of the Interior and some of their other organizations to help ensure that remains in place. On the United States Trade Representative front, Catherine Tai, who was a former congressional staffer at the Ways and Means Committee, had her confirmation hearing today, and it's expected that her vote will be very soon on the Senate floor. There's a lot of focus at USTR because of a lot of the activity during the previous administration that impacted the bike industry. Most relevant in the near term here is the US-China trade relationship, especially as it relates to 301 tariffs and seeing if there's potential relief in the near midterm going forward and what the long-term resolution to those trade relations will be. And also addressing a number of other issues in the trade space that there's a lot of focus, including the generalized system of preferences and miscellaneous tariffs bill, both of which can have an impact on pieces of the bicycle industry, as well as just the broader trade and supply chain challenges. There's a lot of activity around supply chain and making sure that in the future, whether it's a pandemic or otherwise, that some of the supply chain disruptions can be prevented or mitigated, and making sure that we have a smooth supply chain and more coordination and cooperation between industry and government.
Thanks, Charles. So obviously there's a lot moving, or that will be moving in DC legislatively. There's a lot that agencies can do, of course, without Congress, and we wanted to highlight some of the more congressional legislative opportunities ahead, and where we expect to insert bikes. We can look to policies that moved last year. The House passed a really massive infrastructure package last summer. That included a transportation reauthorization bill, among other infrastructure style priorities like broadband, water resources, housing, things like that, that aren't the most related to the transportation policy that we do. But we can look to the package that passed last year in the House as something that will likely help shape what will eventually pass and move this year, and know that PeopleForBikes is actively pushing for our active transportation policy agenda that we published at the end of last year, for an infrastructure package and a transportation reauthorization, if those were to be grouped together like they were last year in the House. Similarly, we're doing that for stimulus opportunities. It still remains to be seen what the Biden administration will push in a stimulus sense after this first initial 1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan that they're currently focused on. But we're supporting, broader transportation priorities that support bikes, maybe not absolutely directly, but potentially indirectly through transit relief, given the crisis around transit systems right now. State and local funding, because a lot of that we saw from the CARES Act funneled into different bike infrastructure projects at the local level, and small business support too. So the Paycheck Protection Program, namely, and other small business administration programs that have helped some folks in the bike industry, and we're making sure that those coffers are continually refilled as needed with advocacy among different partners. But back to the infrastructure package, we are looking at, there's a potential for a tax package, a green style tax package, and there's some bills that we'll talk about after this slide that we're certainly going to push to be included in a final package. And climate mitigation is a huge focus for the majority in Congress and for this administration. And as I've mentioned a few times now, the opportunity to insert bicycles as a way to lower carbon emissions for transportation, also as a way to, as Charles mentioned, increase the amount of advocacy for public lands for climate measures in a recreational space by building new advocates through the love of cycling or mountain biking or something like that. That's something we're focusing on too. And anywhere that there's climate in a broad sense being talked about, we're working to ensure that bikes are included. We can go to the next. Great. So I'm sure many of you watching have seen the introduction of this new bill. We're really excited and applaud the members of Congress that have really led on this and helped, that drafted this. At its core, we're talking about a tax credit for electric bicycle purchases. Simple as that. The bill itself, the Electric Bicycle Incentive Kickstart for the Environment, E-Bike Act, was introduced just about 2 weeks ago, and it would offer a 30% refundable consumer tax credit on the cost of a new qualifying electric bicycle. And that's up to a $1,500 credit, and as written now, up to an $8,000 bicycle. Some more of the details here. Individuals would be allowed the credit once every 3 years or twice for a joint return. It would be, when I say refundable, it means it's eligible for folks who do and don't report income. So even if you don't have income to report on your taxes, you are absolutely eligible to receive this refund on the purchase of your electric bicycle. That was certainly important because we know that electric bicycles really prop up a lot of folks in the delivery space who may have less reportable income, and so making sure that this was affordable and accessible to Americans who are really going to be relying on electric bicycles is important. And so those are just the basics. That's the facts of the bill, but we're obviously excited about it for approximately 1 million different reasons. PeopleForBikes has been researching, exploring, and tracking different incentive programs for electric bicycles and for bicycles generally, all across the world, in the US too, but mostly in Europe, for several years now. And we've been looking for folks in Congress and state legislators and local officials who are also excited about the potential for electric bicycles to really enhance access to bicycling to more people because of that electric boost. We've always championed the bicycle as a transportation vehicle, as a zero carbon transportation vehicle for folks who want and can use it. But we know that a bicycle itself can't meet every single person's needs in the same way that an electric bicycle might not be able to, but an electric bicycle with that boost certainly can do a bit more, especially in the e-cargo space too, where you can put groceries or kids or what have you in the back, and it makes that trip a little bit easier to switch out your car for the electric bicycle. So that's why one of the reasons we're particularly enthusiastic about this bill, and we'll be pushing to get it included in one of the previous legislative opportunities that I was talking about. We have an action alert on our webpage that I'm sure will be included as we send out the information from this webinar to participants. And if you haven't filled it out, sent a letter to your member of Congress asking them to co-sponsor the bill, would please ask that you do. And if you have more questions, of course, please reach out to us. But again, we can't, I think, overstate how enthusiastic we are to finally at the federal level have an incentive introduced for electric bicycles, and it really sort of puts them on par with other electric vehicle incentives in a way by recognizing the electric bicycle as a legitimate transportation option for many Americans seeking to reduce their carbon emissions and do so by bike. And those are the slides.
Awesome. Really, really great. Thank you so much, Noah and Charles. We finished a little bit early, but that's great because we've already got some questions coming through. So we're going to go ahead and jump into Q&A. Again, drop those into the chat or the Q&A feature, and we're going to get into those right now. So one of the questions that I'm seeing from Steve, this is more of a state or local question than federal, but are you also lobbying for sales tax exemptions?
I mean, not at the federal level, that hasn't really been brought up, but I know that there's a bill in the state of Washington that's been introduced to that, and I'm not sure if that's been introduced other places. I can't quite speak to that, just given my focus is federal. But I certainly have colleagues who could.
Yep, and that may be a great question, Steve, to send through to me or Noah after, and we will get you connected with the right person on our team. So thank you very much. Another question from Paul. Any word on expectations to remove tariffs on e-bikes?
I think I can cover that. There is no word right now. I think, as you know, a lot of the exclusions that had previously happened had expired, and everyone's sort of in a waiting period on all tariff-related issues. And so, as it's specific to e-bikes, there's no schedule or near-term plan, but we're hopeful that as a new head of the USTR, a new trade representative takes office, and a new administration obviously gets moving, we're hopeful that there will be some consideration of how to address that U.S.-China trade relationship, which has obviously had a significant impact on all bikes, including e-bikes.
Great, thank you, Charles. Another question from Brian. Why is the tax credit for e-bikes only and not all bicycles?
I can answer that one. Yeah, that's a great question. And there's a few responses. Obviously, we would be supportive of a tax credit for all bicycles, and that certainly has been our starting position, and we've been on the record saying that all bicycles should be incentivized in some way, because if we're talking about climate inequity, they do also have the power to achieve those goals. That said, electric bicycles are just more expensive than regular bicycles, given that they have a motor and a battery and other features, and therefore a bit less accessible to more folks. And so with this trend and movement of electrification and incentives for electric vehicles, electric motorcycles in some instances too, it made sense in a political way. And what Congressman Panetta and Blumenauer, who introduced the bill, what they wanted to do was to put electric bicycles on par. And then also because electric bicycles make the activity of bicycling more accessible to more people, just physically. The boost goes so far to shorten distances, squish hills, and make it easier to put some stuff in the cargo in the back. And so that's really why the focus of this bill is electric bicycles.
Great, thank you. Squish hills, the quote of the day. It's awesome. Another question from Bob. How are we feeling about the chances that the DOI and USTR nominees will be confirmed?
Charles, you got it?
I'm sorry, yeah, just to say right now we're feeling pretty confident both of them will be confirmed.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's jump into some more. Okay, a question from David. Assuming that the Biden administration pursues a major infrastructure bill, what are the opportunities to dedicate funding to active transportation projects?
So there's a lot. And it just depends if we're talking about whether DOT is specifically finding ways within their existing programs to set aside portions of funding for active transportation. That's certainly something that we're considering and asking for. But if we're talking about a bill coming from Congress, we are very strongly focused on increasing set-asides for active transportation within existing transportation infrastructure programs like transportation alternatives. There was a bill that was introduced last Congress and will be reintroduced this year for a 5% set aside specific to active transportation within the federal lands transportation program. So helping maintain trails and biking walk infrastructure in national parks and public lands. But we're also pursuing new programs. And I think that's one of the landmark asks of us and our partners to the administration and Congress is we need dedicated funding and grants going towards connectivity infrastructure. We can have set-asides in all these programs, which is fantastic, but we need funding to go directly towards helping communities really build out their active transportation networks. So there's a bill that was introduced last year and should be reintroduced very shortly, called the Connecting America's Active Transportation Systems Act, CATSA for an acronym. And that's a bill to create a new program that would specifically fund grants going towards enhancing connectivity of bicycle and active transportation networks.
Awesome. Thank you, Noah. A question from Melinda. Is anything being done to expand the capacity for the current e-bike situation? So e-bike maintenance for current owners.
Yeah, so the Bicycle Commuter Act, which is one I meant to mention earlier too, this is also recently reintroduced this Congress. It is a pre-tax, it would offer a pre-tax commuter benefit for bicycling to work. And what's really great about this benefit is that it would be eligible to be used for electric bicycle costs, financing, maintenance, etc. You get to decide because it's pre-tax, as well as bike share. So then that's up to $81 a month, adjusted for inflation, I believe, which is a significant increase from what the bill was offering last year. That's one example of something that we're pursuing that does include electric bicycle maintenance. Beyond that, we are working to really push just the inclusion of electric bicycles in federal programs, the eligibility of electric bicycles in different transportation programs, and that as that eligibility grows, then we'll be able to do more for e-bike maintenance or even charging stations for electric bicycles specifically, and sort of build up that infrastructure.
Great, thank you. Very informative. So another question from Jay. The Biden administration has made it clear that there can be no changes to 301 tariffs in the short term, and it's going to take time to review and study the Chinese policy situation. What is your estimate on how long this could take?
It could be, they haven't made it clear that we don't, I mean, they haven't said any specific timeline besides that they will take their time to review it. Given that Katherine Tai just had her confirmation hearing today in Senate Finance, we expect that process to move fairly quickly. And given her depth of experience on U.S.-China trade policy, we know that they'll be looking into every asset of our trade policy with China, but we unfortunately don't have a clear timeline.
And maybe one other piece to it, we also don't know in what format changes would come, in addition to not knowing the timeline. So, it's anything's possible. It could open up a new exclusion process. They could make some wholesale changes, or they could keep it in place. It's just it's a little unclear this early in the administration.
And I'll add from the industry perspective, because this is such a huge priority, we are continuing to beat the drum on the message that we need tariff relief. Exclusions should be retroactively applied, and that's been our call to the USTR and to Congress especially, getting members of Congress to weigh in with USTR as there's a new representative at the head of it that will ideally help the situation for bike businesses, but we can't, we unfortunately don't have any clear indications of where they're headed right now.
Awesome. And we are running out of time, but we're going to take one more. This is more of a future thinking question from John. The administration clearly cares about climate, but many experts do not see bikes as the solution. How can we start to change those attitudes?
I think the first part is we have to show that there's no silver bullet solution to climate change. I think we can all agree on that, and I'm sure the policy experts do for climate. But we have been pushing the message and have gotten some generally positive responses. The idea that bikes are an essential part of a broader policy solution. A lot of the feedback that we're seeing with the E-Bike Act and a lot of the intent going into it was to make that tax credit part of a broader policy solution to lower carbon emissions. And I know that was the clear intent from Congressman Panetta's office. But it's just a matter of continuing to spread that message and build support for it in Congress and with policy staff in the new administration. And I feel optimistic that that message is being heard and recognized, not just in the sense that bicycles themselves can displace carbon emissions, but that investing in bicycle infrastructure is the fastest and the least expensive way to really, really reduce carbon emissions. And that's something that we've heard from a lot of folks on the Hill, that they understand from a cost perspective. It's great to do electric vehicles and invest in that sense, but the fastest and least expensive way to really reduce local emissions is to invest in bicycle infrastructure.
And I would just maybe say that as all of you are talking to your peers and customers and friends and networks, it's important to, as we are going on Capitol Hill and to the administration really talking about bikes as a solution, would love for you to echo that narrative as well. And it's not just the fact that bikes are a solution to climate. Bikes are also a solution to health and wellness, transportation, equity, and the economy. And the more that we can help people better understand how bikes are a solution to some of the challenges we're facing, the quicker things like all the infrastructure that NOAA is helping lead on will come into reality.
Wonderful. Yes, we've said it before and we're saying it again. Use your voice as the bike industry to help us with these efforts. Thank you so much for joining us today. Again, if you have any questions, Noah's email is right here. Feel free to send those through. And if it's not a federal question, I'm sure she would be happy to get you connected with the right person on our team. Okay, thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.